Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine walking into a funeral home to honor the memory of the person you loved most, only to discover that someone has already planned your own funeral. Not years from now, not someday, right now. Today's story is about betrayal so cold that it didn't begin with stolen money or forged documents. It began with a son who quietly decided his mother was worth more to him dead than alive. If you've ever wondered how far greed can push someone, stay with me until the end. Because what happened after I overheard one conversation changed not only my family, but every decision I would make for the rest of my life. My name is Odette Blackwood, and this is the day I found out my own funeral had already been arranged. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the funeral home was the silence, not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that settles into old buildings where grief has lived for decades. I wasn't there for myself. 1 year earlier, I had buried my husband Malcolm. We had been married for 48 years. He wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend, my business partner, and the only man who ever made me laugh on the worst days of my life. For months, I couldn't bring myself to order his headstone. Every time I tried, it felt like admitting he was never coming home. But anniversaries have a strange way of forcing us to face things we've been avoiding. So that Tuesday morning, I finally walked through the front door of Harrington and Sons Funeral Home with nothing more on my mind than choosing a piece of granite worthy of the man I loved. The receptionist smiled politely. "Mrs. Blackwood? Mr. Blackwood? Reed will be with you in just a few minutes." I thanked her and sat down. The waiting room hadn't changed in years. Dark wood, leather chairs, family photographs on the walls, soft piano music drifting through hidden speakers. I picked up a brochure showing different monument designs, but I wasn't really reading it. I was thinking about Malcolm, about how he used to tease me for taking forever to make decisions. "You'll compare 12 shades of white paint," he'd joke, then somehow pick the first one. I smiled, despite myself. Then I heard a familiar voice. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but there it was again, clear, confident, my son's voice. Landon. He was somewhere behind the closed office door across the hallway. I almost stood up to surprise him. Instead, I froze. "Don't waste money on the premium package." His words drifted through the slightly open door. "The standard casket is more than enough." There was a pause. Then another voice. "Mr. Reed, the funeral director." "Mr. Blackwood, are you certain? Most families prefer to discuss those details together." Landon laughed quietly. "I've already thought it through." Another pause. Then the sentence that stopped my heart. "My mother won't know the difference." I felt every muscle in my body lock. The brochure slipped from my hands onto the carpet. For a second, I honestly wondered if they were discussing someone else. Another woman. Another family. Then Mr. Reed spoke again. "I understand. But she's still alive. Alive." There it was, no misunderstanding, no mistake. They were talking about me. Landon answered without the slightest hesitation. "Not for long. I don't remember breathing. I only remember staring at the floor while my own heartbeat echoed inside my ears." Mr. Tackoed. Reed lowered his voice. "Has her condition gotten worse?" "Condition? What condition?" Landon sighed. "The doctors have prepared us for what's coming." Prepared us. Nobody had prepared me for anything. I had my annual physical 3 weeks earlier. My physician told me I was healthier than most women 10 years younger. The only medication I took was for mild blood pressure. So why was my own son telling people I was dying? I stayed completely still. If they opened that office door, I didn't want them to know I'd heard a single word. Then I heard papers sliding across a desk. Mr. Reed spoke again. "Everything has already been prepaid." "Prepaid?" Landon answered casually. "I didn't want anyone scrambling when the time comes." Mr. Reed hesitated. The service, flowers, transportation, obituary. I know. And the burial plot? I purchased the one next to my father. I closed my eyes. My funeral. Every detail, already paid for, already planned. While I was still walking, breathing, and sitting less than 20 feet away, I should have walked into that office. I should have demanded an explanation. Any normal mother probably would have. Instead, I quietly stood up, picked up the brochure, walked out the front door, and said nothing. Because something inside me whispered that if my son believed I knew nothing, he would eventually tell me everything without realizing it. I had no idea how right that feeling would turn out to be, but before sunset that same day, I would discover that the funeral wasn't the worst secret my son had been hiding. The drive home felt longer than usual. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I kept replaying the same sentence in my head. She won't know the difference. Not because of the casket, because of the way he said it. There wasn't a trace of sadness in his voice, no hesitation, no guilt. Only the calm confidence of someone checking items off a shopping list. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made one decision. I wasn't going to confront Landon, not yet. If someone believes you've seen nothing, they usually become careless. I intended to let my son make every mistake he wanted. I simply had no idea how many mistakes there would be. The house felt strangely empty. Malcolm had designed it himself almost 30 years earlier. Every window, every staircase, every inch of the garden. He used to joke that he built houses for thousands of people, but saved the best one for me. I poured myself a cup of tea and walked toward the study. The room hadn't changed since the day he died. His leather chair still faced the fireplace. His reading glasses still rested on the bookshelf. Even his old fountain pen remained exactly where he'd left it. I sat down behind his desk. Whenever life became confusing, Malcolm always said the same thing. Facts first, feelings later. So I grabbed a notepad. At the top of the page, I wrote one sentence. Why does my son believe I'm dying? Underneath it, I listed everything I actually knew. Someone had prepaid my funeral. Someone had told people I was terminally ill. Landon was acting as though my death was expected very soon. None of those things answered the only question that mattered. Who had started the lie? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Landon? He walked into the kitchen carrying a grocery bag. Hey, Mom. He kissed my cheek, the same way he always had, the same smile, the same warm voice. If I hadn't overheard him that morning, I would have believed everything was normal. I picked up your favorite soup, he said. I figured you might not feel like cooking. That sentence landed differently now. Might not feel like cooking. Was he testing me? Watching me? Looking for signs of an illness that didn't exist? I feel perfectly fine, I replied. He smiled. That's good. Too quickly. Too smoothly. Almost rehearsed. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and immediately slipped it back into his pocket. Everything okay? I asked. Just work. He changed the subject before I could ask anything else. I should get going. Sabrina's waiting. He hugged me. For a brief second, I almost hugged him back the way mothers do. Instead, I noticed something strange. His expensive watch, Rolex, limited edition. Malcolm had admired one just like it years ago, but refused to buy it. He always said no watch was worth that kind of money. Landon had been complaining about financial problems only 6 months earlier, so where had the watch come from? Before leaving, he looked around the living room, not casually, carefully. His eyes paused on the antique grandfather clock, then on Malcolm's bronze sculpture, then on the oil painting above the fireplace. He wasn't looking at memories. He was looking at assets. The moment the front door closed, I wrote one more line on my notepad. He isn't grieving this house. He's inventorying it. That realization chilled me far more than anything I'd heard in the funeral home. The next morning, I called Daniel Harrington. He had been Malcolm's attorney for over 30 years. He answered on the second ring. Odette, it's good to hear your voice. I need to ask you something. His tone immediately changed. Is everything all right? I hope so. I didn't mention the funeral home. Not yet. Instead, I asked the question that had been bothering me all night. Has anyone contacted you about my estate recently? There was silence. Then, as a matter of fact, my stomach tightened. Yes, who? Landon. When? Daniel paused as if deciding whether he should answer. About 6 months ago. 6 months. Long before the funeral arrangements. What did he want? He asked general questions. What kind of questions? He wanted to know how probate would work. I closed my eyes. And he asked whether your home would automatically become part of the estate. What else? Daniel sighed. He also asked how long it usually takes beneficiaries to receive inherited assets. Beneficiaries. Assets. Probate. Not one question about me. Not one question about my health. Only about what happened after I died. I told him, Daniel continued, that none of those discussions were appropriate while you were alive. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I looked at the calendar. 6 months. That meant Landon had started planning something half a year before I walked into the funeral home. This wasn't panic. This wasn't desperation. It was preparation. And people don't prepare for 6 months unless they expect a very large reward. But I still didn't know what that reward was. By lunchtime, I would receive the first real clue, and it wouldn't come from my son. It would come from my neighbor. Around noon, my doorbell rang. Standing outside was Beatrice Holloway. She had lived across the street for nearly 20 years. She held a blueberry pie in one hand. I hope I'm not interrupting. Never. We sat on the back porch drinking coffee. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, her grandchildren, the neighborhood. Then she hesitated. Can I ask you something without offending you? Of course. She looked uncomfortable. I heard you've been very sick. The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. What? She blinked. Oh, I thought everyone knew. Knew what? Her voice dropped. That your cancer came back. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Cancer? I'd never had cancer. Not once in my life. I forced myself to stay calm. Who told you that? She frowned. I assumed your family. No. I heard it from Melissa. Who's Melissa? The realtor hosting the charity gala last month. Realtor. That word caught my attention immediately. Beatrice continued. She said your son was being incredibly strong through such a difficult time. A realtor. Why would a realtor know anything about my health? Unless she had another reason to be talking with my son. And suddenly, for the first time, I began to wonder whether my funeral wasn't the only thing being arranged behind my back. I smiled at Beatrice as if nothing had happened. I think Melissa must have confused me with someone else. Beatrice looked relieved. I was hoping that was the case. You look wonderful. She stayed another 20 minutes before heading home. The second her car disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my keys. I wasn't interested in Melissa. I was interested in one word: realtor. Landon wasn't planning for my death. He was planning for what came after it. The first place I drove wasn't a real estate office. It was the county records building. Malcolm always believed one thing. If someone wants to hide the truth, start with public records. 40 minutes later, I was sitting in front of a clerk named Denise. I'd like to know if there had been any recent filings involving my property. She typed my address into her computer. No transfer of ownership. I let out a small breath. Then she frowned. There is something else. What? A valuation request. When? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. The same week I had gone for my annual physical. Who requested it? I'm sorry. I can't disclose the client's identity. Was it a bank? No. A buyer? She couldn't answer. But I can tell you it was ordered by a licensed real estate brokerage. A brokerage, not curiosity. Preparation. Someone had paid to determine exactly how much my house was worth, without ever mentioning it to me. As I walked back toward my car, one thought refused to leave my mind. A funeral, a realtor, a property valuation. These weren't separate events. They were pieces of the same plan. I just couldn't see the picture yet. But someone else could. That evening, my phone rang. Daniel Harrington. I've been thinking about your questions. So have I. There was one thing I didn't mention earlier. I sat down immediately. What is it? Landon wasn't alone. What do you mean? When he came to see me 6 months ago, Sabrina was with him. That surprised me less than it should have. They did most of the talking together. What did Sabrina say? Daniel paused. She asked whether elderly clients ever changed their wills after receiving a serious diagnosis. I stared at the wall. So they were already discussing illness. Yes, and I told them the same thing I told Landon. What? That no diagnosis changes a valid estate plan unless the client decides otherwise. I thanked him again. Then another question crossed my mind. Daniel, yes? Have I changed my will in the past 10 years? No. Does anyone besides you have the original? No. So no one can alter it. Correct. That answer should have reassured me. Instead, it made me wonder why anyone would bother spreading rumors about my health if they couldn't touch the will, unless the will wasn't their biggest concern. The house was. The next morning, I made coffee and walked through every room. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at family memories. I was looking through my son's eyes. The grand piano, the antique furniture, the artwork Malcolm had collected over decades. Every piece had value. Every room represented money. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold. The grandfather clock. Its pendulum had stopped. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that the cabinet door was slightly open. I knew I hadn't opened it. Inside the clock, Malcolm had hidden a small envelope years earlier. Not because it contained money, because it contained the spare keys to the wall safe in his study. The envelope was gone. I rushed upstairs. The safe was still locked. I opened it. Inside were Malcolm's military medals, several family photo albums, a small velvet box, and a thick leather folder. At first glance, nothing seemed missing. Then I noticed something strange. The folder wasn't sitting where Malcolm always kept it. Someone had opened it recently. There was no dust underneath. I slowly untied the leather strap. The documents were still there. Business records, insurance policies, investment statements. Then I reached the last page. It wasn't there. The inventory sheet. Malcolm had always attached a handwritten inventory listing every valuable item inside the house. Paintings, jewelry, coins, furniture, everything. Someone had removed exactly one page, nothing else, just the inventory. Whoever opened the safe hadn't been looking for cash. They'd been making a list. I suddenly remembered Landon's eyes moving across the living room the day before. He hadn't been admiring the house. He'd been checking whether everything was still there. I replaced every document exactly as I'd found it, closed the safe, locked the study. Then I did something I hadn't done in almost a year. I called Malcolm's oldest friend, Victor Ellison. If anyone knew every corner of Malcolm's life, it was Victor. He answered with his usual booming voice. Odette, to what do I owe this pleasant surprise? I need your help. 20 minutes later, he was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I trusted Victor with my life. He and Malcolm had started their first construction company together before selling it decades earlier. He listened without interrupting as I described everything except the conversation in the funeral home. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. You're asking the wrong question. I am? Yes, I'd been asking why Landon thinks you're dying. Victor shook his head. That's not the important question. What is? He looked directly into my eyes. Who benefits if everyone else believes you're dying? The room fell silent. I had been so focused on my son, I hadn't considered everyone else. Banks, buyers, neighbors, business associates, real estate agents. People make very different decisions when they believe someone has only weeks left to live. Victor stood and walked toward the living room window. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Odette, I think someone has already started selling your future. I thought he meant my house. I was wrong. Because less than an hour later, I would discover that someone had already found a buyer. Victor was still standing by the window when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored calls like that. This time, I answered. Mrs. Blackwood? Yes. My name is Melissa Carter. We haven't met, but I believe we have a mutual friend. The realtor. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. What can I do for you? There was an awkward pause. I'm not sure whether I should be calling. Then why are you? Because I think I've made a terrible mistake. Victor looked at me. I put the call on speaker. Melissa lowered her voice. I attended the Thompson Charity Gala last month. I know. Your son introduced me to several investors. I said nothing. He mentioned that your family estate would likely be entering the market soon. My heart sank. He said your health had taken a serious turn. Another lie. He asked whether I had clients interested in historic properties. And I told him yes. I closed my eyes. Did he ask you to sell my house? Not officially. What does that mean? He wanted an estimated market value. I never authorized that. I know that now. The silence between us lasted several seconds. Then Melissa said something that changed everything. I also found a buyer. Victor's head snapped toward me. What? The client loved the property. When? 3 weeks ago. Exactly when the valuation had been ordered. He was prepared to make an offer before the house was ever listed. My pulse quickened. Why? Melissa hesitated. He believed the family had already agreed to sell. Family. Not me. Family. Who told him that? Your son. After hanging up, neither Victor nor I spoke for almost a minute. Finally, he broke the silence. So now we know. No. We know enough. I shook my head. We know someone wants my house. Victor leaned forward. No, Odette. They don't want your house. They want your signature. That sentence stayed with me. Because he was right. Without me, nothing could happen. Unless someone believed I wouldn't be around much longer. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had avoided since Malcolm's funeral. I drove to Blackwood Construction, the company my husband had spent 40 years building. Although Malcolm had retired before his death, he still owned a substantial share of the business. After he passed away, those shares transferred to me. Landon became Chief Executive Officer. I remained the largest individual shareholder. I rarely interfered. Malcolm always wanted Landon to have the chance to prove himself. As I entered the lobby, several longtime employees smiled. It's so good to see you, Mrs. Blackwood. You look wonderful, healthy, alive, exactly as I was, which made the next discovery even harder to understand. On the reception desk sat a bouquet of white lilies. A small card rested beside it. I glanced down. Thinking of you during this difficult time, no signature. I frowned. Who are these for? The receptionist looked surprised. For you. Why? She hesitated. I assumed you knew. Knew what? She lowered her voice. Everyone heard you've been receiving treatment. Treatment. Another version of the same lie. I forced myself to smile. I think someone has been spreading rumors. Her face turned pale. Oh my goodness. She genuinely hadn't known. Someone had been feeding the same story to everyone. Employees, neighbors, friends, realtors. How many more people believed I was dying? I took the elevator to the executive floor. Landon's assistant smiled. He just stepped into a meeting. That's all right. I'll wait. She offered me coffee. I accepted. While she walked toward the break room, I noticed Landon's office door hadn't fully closed. Voices drifted into the hallway. Timing is everything. A man I didn't recognize. Then Landon answered. I know. We just need a little more patience. What if she changes her mind? She won't. How can you be sure? Landon chuckled. Because she doesn't know what's happening. I stood perfectly still. The man spoke again. And if her health improves? There was a brief silence. Then Landon laughed. It won't matter. Those 4 words sent a chill through me. It won't matter. What exactly wouldn't matter? My health, my survival, or something else entirely? I stepped away before anyone opened the door. I had heard enough, or so I thought. As I left the building, security called after me. "Mrs. Blackwood?" I turned. One of the older guards hurried over. "I've worked here for 23 years. "I know." He looked nervous. "I probably shouldn't say anything." "Then don't." But he glanced over his shoulder. "I respected your husband too much to stay quiet." My heartbeat accelerated. "What is it?" He reached into his pocket. "I found this in the parking garage yesterday." He handed me a folded sheet of paper. It blew underneath one of the security booths. I unfolded it. It was a printed email. Most of it had been cut off. Only the final lines remained. "Closing must happen before estate complications arise. Client has assured us the transition will be smooth. No names, no signatures. Only one phrase circled in blue ink. Before estate complications arise." Estate. Again. Everything pointed back to the same thing. Not my health, my estate. The guard cleared his throat. "I thought maybe it belonged to one of the executives." "It probably did," he nodded. "I just had a bad feeling about it." "So do I." I drove home with the paper resting on the passenger seat. For the first time since all this began, I stopped believing I was dealing with simple greed. This was organized, planned. Every conversation, every rumor, every document, every lie supported the next one. Someone had spent months building a future that depended on one event, my death. But when I reached home, I discovered something that made every rumor, every forged story, and every suspicious conversation seem almost insignificant. The front door was locked. The alarm hadn't gone off. Yet someone had been inside my house. I knew something was wrong before I even stepped inside. It wasn't the lock. It wasn't the alarm. It was the smell. The house carried the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne. Malcolm had always joked that after 50 years together, I could tell when he'd walked through the front door before I even heard his footsteps. He was right. Homes remember people. And mine remembered someone who didn't belong there. I slowly walked from room to room. Nothing looked out of place. The silver was still in the dining room. The paintings still hung on the walls. The television, the piano, everything appeared untouched, which somehow felt even more unsettling. People who steal valuables leave empty spaces. People looking for information leave everything exactly where they found it. I went upstairs, opened the study. The safe remained locked. But something else caught my attention. Malcolm's desk. The center drawer wasn't completely closed. Only half an inch. Most people would never have noticed. Malcolm always closed every drawer completely. Every single one. Inside, I found a folder lying upside down, not missing, simply facing the wrong direction. Someone had searched through it, carefully, methodically, trying not to leave a trace. I checked the contents. Nothing appeared to be gone. Then I remembered something. Malcolm used to keep a tiny strip of transparent tape inside important folders, not to seal them, to tell if someone had opened them. His habit from decades of business negotiations. I looked closely. The tape had been sliced with a razor, almost invisible, but not invisible enough. Someone had definitely opened the file. The question was, what had they been looking for? That evening, I called Daniel again. "I need you to tell me something. I'm listening. If someone wanted to force the sale of my house, they can't. What if they believed I was too ill to make decisions? They still can't. What if they convinced people I was mentally incapable?" Silence. Longer this time. "Daniel, that's different." "How different?" "If someone successfully petitioned the court claiming diminished capacity, they could request a conservatorship." The room suddenly felt much colder. "And who usually files those petitions?" "Close relatives." My hand tightened around the phone. "A son?" "Yes." "A daughter?" "Yes." "A spouse?" "Yes." I stared through the living room window. Everything finally began connecting. The rumors, the illness, the funeral, the real estate valuation. They weren't trying to inherit faster. They were trying to convince the world I could no longer manage my own life. If they succeeded, I wouldn't need to die. I'd simply lose the right to decide. That possibility terrified me far more than anything I'd imagined. Because death ends a life. A conservatorship can quietly erase it while you're still alive. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I visited my physician. Dr. Eleanor Pierce had treated me for almost 15 years. She smiled the moment she saw me. "This is a surprise. I need a favor." "What kind?" "I need copies of every medical record you've ever kept on me." She looked confused. "Certainly. Have you ever diagnosed me with cancer?" She blinked. "No." "Any terminal illness?" "No." "Dementia?" She actually laughed. "Odette, your memory is better than mine." Her smile disappeared when she saw my expression. "What happened?" I told her everything, not every detail, just enough. By the time I finished, she looked genuinely disturbed. "I've never spoken to your son about your medical condition." "I assumed you hadn't." "No one from my office has either, so someone invented all of this." "I'm afraid so." She printed every record herself. Then she handed me a sealed envelope. "If anyone ever questions your health," she paused, "give them this." I slipped it into my purse. For the first time in days, I felt like I held something stronger than suspicion. I held proof. As I walked toward my car, another vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Black SUV, dark windows. The driver stayed inside, watching. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it wasn't. When I started my engine, the SUV started too. I turned right. So did it. I drove through 3 intersections. Still there. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot. The SUV slowed, then continued driving without stopping. I memorized the license plate anyway. Perhaps I was becoming paranoid. Or perhaps someone had begun wondering why I wasn't behaving like a woman who believed she was dying. That evening, Landon called. "Mom." His voice sounded unusually cheerful. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "Sabrina and I would love to have dinner with you Friday." "Just dinner?" "Actually," he laughed, "I've invited a few people." "What people?" "You'll see." Something about his tone made every instinct I had come alive. "What are we celebrating?" "Oh, nothing." Another pause. "I just think it's time we all sat down as a family." After hanging up, I called Victor, then Daniel. Neither of them liked the invitation. Victor said exactly what I was already thinking. If Landon suddenly wants everyone in one room, he wants something signed. Daniel agreed. "Don't sign a single piece of paper." "I won't." But deep inside, I wasn't planning to refuse the dinner. I was planning to attend, because after weeks of chasing clues, I had the feeling my son was finally ready to make his move. He just had no idea. I had already started preparing mine. Friday evening arrived faster than I expected. I intentionally wore the same navy blue dress Malcolm had always loved. If this was going to be the night my son tried to take everything from me, I wanted to face him looking exactly like the woman he had underestimated. When I arrived, Landon greeted me with a warm smile. "Mom, you look amazing." "I feel amazing." For the briefest moment, I saw disappointment flash across his face. Then it disappeared. The dining room was already full. Sabrina, Victor, Daniel Harrington, Melissa Carter, 2 members of our company's board, even Michael Reed, the funeral director. Landon looked slightly surprised to see him. "I didn't know you invited Michael." "I didn't," I replied calmly. "I did." Every conversation in the room stopped. Landon forced a smile. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "I agree." I remained standing instead of taking my seat. "So let's clear it up." Daniel quietly placed a thick folder on the dining table. Landon looked at him. "What is this?" "My client's instructions." "My client?" Daniel smiled politely. "Mrs. Blackwood." I opened the folder. The first document is from Dr. Eleanor Pierce. I handed copies to everyone. It confirms I have never been diagnosed with cancer. Silence. No terminal illness. More silence. No cognitive impairment. Landon's confident expression began to fade. Sabrina stared at the papers. I continued. The second document is a sworn statement from Melissa Carter. Melissa took a deep breath. Landon told me Mrs. the Blackwood would soon be unable to manage the property. I believed him. I never should have. Landon interrupted. She's lying. Melissa looked directly at him. No, you are. I nodded toward Michael Reed. Would you mind explaining why my funeral was prepaid? The funeral director looked uncomfortable. I believed Mr. Blackwood was acting on his mother's wishes. Were those wishes ever discussed with me? No. Did I sign anything? No. Were you told I was terminally ill? Yes. And who told you that? Michael slowly turned toward Landon. He did. The room fell completely silent. Landon finally stood. This is ridiculous. You've all misunderstood. No, I answered. For weeks I've been trying to understand. Now I finally do. I picked up another document, the county valuation request, then another, the buyer inquiry, then another, the internal email discussing the property before any legal authority existed. Landon looked from one page to another. His confidence was disappearing by the second. You searched my home. I don't know what you're talking about. You removed the inventory from Malcolm's safe. No. You convinced neighbors I was dying. No. You convinced employees I was receiving treatment. No. You arranged my funeral. I was trying to help. Hall. Help? For the first time that evening, my voice became cold. You planned every detail of my death before asking how I was feeling. No one spoke, not even Sabrina. Then Daniel opened the final folder. I have one more document. Landon looked relieved. My mother's will? Daniel smiled. No, her new will. Landon froze. What? It was signed 2 weeks ago. He turned toward me. You changed it? Yes. His face went pale. You couldn't. I already did. Daniel began reading. Mrs. Bass, Odette Blackwood hereby establishes the Malcolm Blackwood Foundation. The family home will become its headquarters. The investment portfolio will permanently fund scholarships for young engineers and construction apprentices. The art collection will be donated to the City Museum. The company's shares will be transferred into an independent charitable trust. Landon whispered only one word. No. Daniel continued. A modest financial gift of $1 is left to her son, Landon Blackwood. The room remained perfectly still. Daniel closed the folder. The purpose of the $1 inheritance is to make clear that no accidental omission occurred. Victor quietly smiled. He knew exactly why Malcolm had once explained that legal strategy to me. Landon looked at me as if he didn't recognize the woman standing across the table. You destroyed everything. I shook my head. No, you did. You left me nothing. I left you exactly what you earned. His voice cracked. I'm your son, and I was your mother. For 72 years, you stopped acting like my son long before I stopped acting like your mother. He looked around the room. No one defended him. Not Sabrina. Not the board members. Not even the people who had believed his stories. Because the truth had arrived one document at a time, and lies rarely survive paperwork. Landon quietly picked up his coat. Before leaving, he stopped beside me. I'm sorry. For just a moment, I almost believed him. Then I remembered the funeral brochure, the prepaid casket, the lies, the rumors, the inventory, the buyers, the months of planning. No, I said softly, you're sorry you failed. He lowered his head and walked out the front door. I never saw him again. Several months later, the Malcolm Blackwood Foundation officially opened. Every year, dozens of young people receive scholarships in my husband's name. The old family house is still standing. Its doors are open to students instead of speculators. Sometimes people ask whether I regret changing my will. I always give the same answer. No. Because inheritance is not a reward for being related to someone. It is a reflection of the life you've chosen to live. Landon believed he was preparing for my funeral. What he never understood was this: the day I overheard him choosing my casket, I didn't lose my family. I discovered I had already lost it long before I walked into that funeral home. And that discovery didn't bury me, it saved my life.